right. Well, I am so excited to have Chris Perry here with us today, the chairman of the Futures at Weber Shandwick. I'm so excited that you're here. We're going to be talking all about AI today. Yep. You have been featured at the New York Times, the Washington Post. I mean, a lot of different places as kind of the leader of AI and what we're talking about today. I think that this is a really important topic, especially when it comes to the future of AI, but also when we're talking about book writing and entrepreneurs, because I think so many of us are like either in the yay, we love it, or no, we hate it kind of phrase, right? So welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you here. Also the author of Perspective Agents. So we're super excited about that. So we're going to be talking about the book today. So welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Great to be here, and there's a lot to talk about.
There is a lot to talk about. AI is kind of one of those things that we either shy away from, like, la, 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 it's going to go away, but it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. So talk to us a little bit about your work at Weber Shandwick and what the Futures is and how that prompted you kind of to write this book, which we're going to dive into as well.
Sounds good. So background at Weber Shandwick, which is a global comms agency, is a few years ago, on the heels of building a digital and social media business inside of the firm, we saw so many anomalies on how people were making sense of the world, making decisions in life, turning to, in some cases, different influencers that had credibility or had a lack of credibility, that we had to step back and really start to ask some bigger questions around what was going on. So really, Futures was born out of a research project that we did with the Institute for the Future in 2020 of all years. We started the study in 2019, and then COVID hit. We're like, oh my gosh, we're trying to do a sense-making research project when pretty much all common sense and common norms went out the window. But at the same time, we also realized we had to take the change or the break seriously in what we found in the research. We created a media lab at Weber that I oversee and run with a great team.
What does the media lab consist of? Like when you say media lab, to the everyday person, what does that look like? What does that consist of?
Great question. So we do a number of things. First of all, we do research. So we understand how people are using technologies like AI, to what end, and we'll get into that in a bit. We also really look into workplace culture, consumer culture, political culture, and try to determine, again, how people are making sense of the world and how institutions, big and small, private, public, can better have they can participate in the discourse out in the world. It's just been a huge point of, both growth as well as value for the company because of all the changes that have taken place. So first is research. Second is partnerships. So we have great partnerships with AI companies, digital product studios that are essentially creating early stage technology companies, a lot of them obviously focused on AI, clearly venture capital, because again, they have their theses that obviously influence how we need to think about things. So to make a long story short, it's a collection of labs, including a couple academic groups, and then we create our own tools and our own communications pilots that then over time become kind of standard fare.
That's so cool. I love that because I think, when we think about culture, right, how people do what people like them do, right, and how that fuels kind of buying cycles and media cycles and all of that. And that really, I think, talks and goes into a lot about your book when you're talking about these perspective agents,
correct,
right? Let's kind of go into the work that you've done at Weber and that research study. So now you start putting those pieces together and start thinking, okay, I need to write a book about this.
I wanted to write a book for a long time. So I guess on a podcast like this, we talk about origin stories, right?
Yeah. I would love to hear the origin story for sure.
So the gig at Weber in the book both come from a lesson that I learned when I came out of school and worked in our family business in Detroit. So I talk about it in the book. My dad, who kept his business affairs separate from the family life, he invited me into his business. And it was a really cool place. It was a graphic art studio in Detroit, Michigan, when advertising was the thing and automotive was, without question, the biggest industry anywhere. And in his studio, and again, there's a lesson in this, it's a craft business. So it was a ragtag group of artists and keyliners and typesetters, meaning people who created advertising literally by hand. That was his studio. And so the madmen of the era, they would essentially do what Don Draper did. They'd go out for lunch and they'd scheme up ideas. They'd scribble, again, the concepts on napkins. And my dad would go back to his studio and essentially create the storyboards and the layouts and all that by hand. Wow. He liked to have a good time. He wasn't necessarily reading the tea leaves. And a thing called the Macintosh hit. And then the Macintosh then got software called PageMaker, right? And Photoshop.
Yep.
Now we fast forward 30 years later, the word we use is automation. We got automated. And his business was like this, and then it crashed because he was on the wrong side of a technology cycle. And so both with Weber, as well as with the book, my enduring mission has been, how do I make sure, given how hard that lesson was, it was extraordinarily painful, how do we help our clients, how do I help my colleagues stay on the right side of technology curves? And AI is a massive one.
That hits home, I think, probably to so many people because you watched your dad at the peak crash.
I joined him at the peak.
You joined him at the peak.
I crashed with him.
You crashed with him.
So when we talk about automation and technology-induced change, this isn't for me like some abstract theory or a headline that you read on, some consultant's report on like what's going to happen to jobs. I saw it. I felt it. I lived it. And frankly, I rebounded from it. It had more opportunity than I would ever have if I would have stayed the course with my dad. Right. And so that's another lesson in the book is what is, painful in the moment actually can open up many, many doors if you are looking at things with a clear eye.
It's so true. I always say, I love the phrase, I learn at the speed of pain. That I learn from mistakes better than I learn from success, right? I'm sorry that you had to go through that with your dad, but if you were to look at, let's say you were to take that example and let's put it in today's society, is that what will happen to business owners who do not accept and adapt to what is going on in today's culture?
100%.
Right.
And that, again, is based on a reference, having a media lab and having partnerships with tech companies and being in, some circles where we can see what's actually coming versus what's theoretically coming. This is a wave that's going to wipe some people out.
That's interesting because, when reading through the book, one of the things that you said was, I'm writing this now, and I hope that by the time I'm done writing this book and it goes out, basically, I hope that this is still what's going on because everything is moving so fast because you're able to see what's up and coming, years before it actually comes to market, like ChatGPT. How many years before that came to market were you playing around with that?
There were a couple early stage apps that got fairly commercial before ChatGPT. The one that I was playing around with, not for the book, but just to think about how, again, AIs can create content. The personal one was Copysmith. But we also had conversations with another group called Narrative Science that for years has been doing auto summaries for a bunch of news organizations and Yahoo. So it's not as if, again, AI created content was new when I was writing the book. But when ChatGPT hit, it took that whole notion of AI-assisted writing into a totally different place.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, and why I wrote the book, if you can't alter the way you see things and expect the unexpected in some cases, you'll be very surprised and you will be unprepared. And frankly, I was a little unprepared despite all the visibility that we and I have into the tech scene. When ChatGPT hit, it was right around the same time that my first draft was done. Oof. And I was like, oh my God. A, it could have been helpful. B, maybe it could have, helped me with research, which it's really good at doing. And C, is there a point of being an author anymore if computers can generate human-like stuff? And I'm sure we'll get into it.
Yes,
maybe later.
I love that question, yeah.
But I don't see it happening.
I don't see it happening either, but I definitely think that that's a fear that a lot of people have. And we're going to get into that about do we see this wiping out jobs and things like that? But the perspective agents, let's talk about that, right? So why talking about perspective agents? Why that topic? What do you see that title as being so bold to title your book that?
Yeah, so let's break the two words apart. So one, I believe into my bones, or whatever the phrase is, I believe strongly.
Deep in your bones.
Deep in my bones, that in terms of a leadership skill, perspective is the most overlooked trait and the most important trait to build capacity for, to build and expand and deepen, given the wave of change that is already come ashore, and it's just beginning. So we're going to experience all kinds of unexpected things. And if your eyes are open, you're calm and you're aware, there's never been greater opportunities ever. And if you're not, that's when the wave can wipe you out.
So that was the question that I had, is how can people align their perspective in these days right now with what's going on and not just put their head in the sand?
Well, that's in part, again, so the book, and we have to come back to the title. The book essentially gives 13 different ways of seeing a changing world. Some of it is the price of lacking true perspective, and we saw it with major events like COVID, like missing the financial crisis. Like there are some things that like elites have missed that have affected us. But then there are other examples that go downstream, like people trading the wrong stocks, people being susceptible to mis and disinformation. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And if you're passive and kind of, stuck in your ways, you're going to be a victim with this stuff. If you are a critical thinker and know where to look and know how to see scenarios in different ways, again, ways in some cases that are presented in the book, I think there's a lot of advantage in that.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So if perspective is paramount, then how do you gain it? Well, how have we gained it to date? You're an agent, right?
Yep.
You're doing a podcast here, and it's great. You have lots of people that follow you and learn from you. Media figures, experts, academics, doctors. I mean, the list could go on and on. The trust in every institution outside of, I think, small business has cratered over the last, let's say, 30 years. But there's new types of agents. There's different type of influencers, right? All kinds of experts that are both credible and frankly lacking credibility, that are fighting not only for our attention, but to wrestle our point of view to align with theirs. And it could be for a lot of reasons. It could be for good reasons. They could be grifters. They could be politicos. They could be so it's really messy out there. But what happens now when AIs enter the mix? An example would be ChatGPT is a perspective agent. You can go into it, you can ask it any question, and now it's spitting out something that feels like you're talking to a media person or a doctor. Or in these AIs, we use ChatGPT as the proxy. There's thousands of these things now. And so some of these are general agents, like Google's a perspective agent.
Right.
But then there are verticals that start to get really interesting and really weird. So in the book, I talk, for example, about Replica. Are you familiar with Replica?
I'm not.
So Replica is a company that makes avatars that are your friends. If you go to replica.com, you can see.
I'm going to look it up as we do it. Okay,
and
go
what's
ahead.
What's interesting, when you pull the site up, it positions these avatars as soulmates. These are AI friends. These AI friends hit our radar when we did our research in 2019. And there are upwards of 10 million people who have replicas, meaning AI friends. And everyone who I ask, do you know what replica is? No one knows, yet there's this massive community of people with one app alone that use a AI as a friend, lover, confidant, counselor, you name it. You can program this thing to be anything you want it to be. It's always there.
It just says that. Did you see my face? I was like, this says the AI companion who cares, always here to listen and talk, always on your side.
Yeah.
That's what it talks about.
There's a whole chapter on relationships in the book that when you read it, it definitely induces discomfort. But then if you think about certain scenarios, so Stanford did a study on the effects of, I think it was Replica, but it might have been another avatar provider that's used by people that are so mentally ill, they're suicidal.
Mm.
And they've been shown to reduce suicide. They've been seen as a form of therapy, and they've been seen as a form of transition back into being healthy. Wow. As we, again, talk further about AI, it's really important not to judge. Although some things are so crazy, it's like you cannot not judge. But in some ways, you have to hold judgment because these things are changing us, and changing norms, and changing opportunities, and altering the specter of threat. And so when I talk about 13 lenses, again, you don't have to read the book front to back, but you can go into anything that you're thinking about, whether it's leadership, relationships, spirituality. I mean, we could talk about that. Like that's a huge territory where there's a migration of ancient wisdom and new technology. And the whole back is about new leadership principles to deal with, again, the age that we're in and the age that we're going into.
Thinking about replica, it's funny that I've never heard about that. And I think about what is that going to look like, as a parent, right? When my kids grow up, are they going to grow up and are these just going to be so ingrained into what they know and what they do that reaching out to an AI friend is a normal thing, right? I think back to like when I was a kid and the Microsoft hit and we had AOL Messenger and we thought, oh, like, I wonder what this is, right? What is this going to do? My dad was the head of information technology at General Electric.
Oh, wow.
And so we had all the things like before anybody had anything. And I remember my friends never had any computers and I had like a basement full of them. And I always felt so ahead of times because my dad was always so ahead of, and he still is ahead of times, like on me. Like he owns like a cybersecurity law firm now. I try not to like almost, I don't want to sound like nerdy, but it's like, what will this be? And I'm sure you have so much more of an inclination of that because you're working with these companies that are 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. But how can we as business owners prepare ourselves for this kind of transition? Like, what are the systems we need to put in place for ourselves? What are the systems we need to put in place for our staff? What are these types of things to grow so that we don't go on that crash? Because I think as a business owner myself, in the PR industry, which I think sometimes can tend to be a little bit old school, bringing my staff up along and my publicists, trying to get them ingrained in AI and teaching them. Sometimes I feel like I don't even have the time to learn all the things to be able to teach them all the things. So like, what are some easy kind of practical things we can do to even just start?
Yeah. So that's just such a big question.
I know it's such a big question.
But again, I talk in the book about a concept called active inertia. Not my term, it's sourced. But I really thought it was a great way of describing the challenge that we all have. When we're running businesses and managing families and trying to have a social life and be a well-rounded human being, when it comes back to work, we tend to be very protective. And then we tend to exert what's called active inertia, meaning we get nervous, we get scared, and what do? We double down on things we know. And we essentially go faster and faster, but we don't go forward. If you want to lead and benefit from what's coming, you have to be able to carve out time to understand the tools, to understand how they can be used, and ideally used for good. Subtext in this, a human guide to the autonomous age. I am not a tech guy. I look at tech, and again, given where I work, we have to study how people are using tech that changes behavior and changes interaction models and all those things that we advise clients on. When we're with clients now talking about AI, it all starts with you have to carve the time out. So we tend to spend now lots of time, like one of the biggest Fortune 500 companies will be at the office on Wednesday, and they're going to spend 4 hours, and we are going to take them through a series of demos that show how they can be used. And when I say they, I'm talking about 20 different platforms, how they can be used, where they kind of suck, ways that might shift your perspective away from these things are great creation tools into they're extraordinary research tools. Like that's the big aha that I had when I was playing with them while writing the book. If you thought Google was great, like there are like 20 different search engines that can help you test ideas, go deep into research papers, summarize research papers. Like it's a wave of good if you look at it from a sense-making standpoint.
Yeah.
Right? So I'll answer your question directly now. You got to carve time out. You have to understand basic tools that are relevant for your business. And you need to find people who you could talk with and work with in some type of communal way, because it really sucks to try to figure this stuff out alone. And so more schools are spinning up executive ed programs. There's new curriculums that will soon be in, post-grad, colleges. But I found, and again, this is the other thing that we do with our lab, we create networks of people that want to talk about issues that we're all struggling with, trying to sort out, trying to get a read on. And the most important thing is to have a diverse range of viewpoints coming in, because otherwise you come back to that active inertia.
We were talking earlier about, do you think that AI is going to replace, books, the book writing process? And we kind of got to the idea that, it probably won't, but you toyed with that idea, that question when you were writing this book. So why do you think it could or couldn't replace books in general?
I honestly don't think we can predict the future. I don't think books are going away, because whenever anything becomes obsolete, it doesn't mean it goes away. It just means that it's eclipsed by something that's more prominent. But it doesn't mean, for example, the TV replaced the radio or the internet replaced TV. So again, from that standpoint, I would bet big that books aren't going away. If anything, there might be a rebound in books and book reading. And I'm starting to get a sense of that based on some of the research that we've seen with Gen Zers spending more time in libraries, right? Silent reading groups that are now popping up. You could probably tell me more about this than I'm telling you. So there is a certain subset of the population that I think is still under the mode of deep reading, linear, line by line, highlighting, annotating, all that. The hypertext crowd does not read. They skim, they recognize patterns, they use a whole collection of tools, again, talked about in the book, that are great tools for thinking. But for me, using the tools for thinking like a Roam or an Obsidian or those kind of things, they're great as databases. They don't change the need to have depth when you want to go deep into a subject, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. To really be immersed into something is to really experience something. And I don't think you can experience something by just having surface level stuff, or in some ways like average, because that's what these algorithms are. It's an averaging out of what they think the next word should be in the prompt that you put in. Or the response to the prompt that you put in.
Right. So if you're thinking about, the story you told us at the beginning about your dad, you can't get that story just from AI, right? That story comes from you and your life experience. That, I think, adds perspective and depth to the context of what you're actually writing.
It would never come from an AI.
Exactly.
In the case of my dad's business, Macs didn't replace creative directors. They replaced, again, production people. That's the risk with generative AI now. For production level tasks, they're just way faster and will eventually be way better than a human's ability to produce something. What are the inputs? I mean, Stephen Johnson, prolific author, I was at an event and he said, this is the greatest generation ever for writers. Why? Because you now have to persuade a machine to give you, again, what you're looking for, not just, again, like the person reading your stuff or the person that you're trying to, engage, right? So it takes a creative human act to start the process, to edit the process, to refine the work, and to put something out in the world that's worth reading. And I just don't see stuff coming purely from AIs being anywhere near replacing humans in that regard.
And that's what gets to the question of like the people that are so anti-AI, what would you say to them to get them on the other side?
I don't know if we should be taking sides. I think we should be exploring what these enhance, what these take away, and maybe new openings to create different genres of work. I've just mentioned again, like I'm not a writer, and I did this at night because I'm super, super busy during the day. It was a long, slow process of thinking about the idea, because every book has to have an idea,
right,
of what's going to be helpful and useful to a reader, which takes time. So just literally like the concept and outline took a while. I feel like that still is the domain of us. And I don't think any great piece of work can start without a clean sheet, because it does require what human creativity is all about, which is originating something that has a unique point of view and is going to have value.
Right.
Then we go to the next phase, which is first draft, which is everyone's biggest nightmare, right? So you still have to, again, put, the stuff on the page, however sloppy, but that's where the research elements can be enhanced by AI. As you get through the editing process, the AIs are already in the software. So I assume that you and a lot of people listen to this, you probably have Grammarly just baked into your
just on my computer. I have
it's just in it. Or Google has autocorrect. Like the AIs are already in there. You can already see that the nudging of style, it's already there. But there are also other interesting tools to help you with your own editing before you turn it over to a professional editor. Well, great tool is called Lex. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
There's probably a dozen different tools that I played with while writing Perspective Agents. Lex was the most interesting because it actually gave you advice on structure and the quality of your argument and the, to a degree, the novelty of the way that you're presenting your idea. Most of the other tools are more about originating. This, again, is about research. If we think about the layers, you have to come up with the concept and kind of build out what you want to say. You have to do the research. AI can help there. Then as you're going through the drafting process, there are new AIs that can help you there. Man, after that, no way.
Then it's all on you.
Well, you and human editors and people who know what good looks like and know like how you could take, what could be a, 5 or a 6 and make it a 7 or 8 or ideally a 10. There are no AIs that can take you from mediocrity to excellent that I've seen.
When I was writing my last book, I remember going to the library and just pulling off every self-help book that I could find that was relevant to my topic and trying to find quotes that I wanted to use to talk about this and that. And like now it would have been so easy to just go to ChatGPT and be like, hey, can you give me 20 book quotes on this topic, right? And then weave those into maybe a chapter or something like that that would be relevant towards the chapter that I was talking about. Because, we always like to use book quotes of other authors and things like that. That would have been so much easier, thinking about that. But I love even using just in day-to-day business, using it for, like what you said, inspiration, ways to take your business to the next level, all of those kind of things. So in your book writing process, is that how you used ChatGPT or whatever else? You did it all on paper?
No, I was late. So, if we're getting into like cut of the details, I put the first draft in Scrivener, found it to be kind of hard. And then when I signed with Greenleaf, everything went into Word for version control and ended up just working it, again, I would say the traditional way. The research piece is a little more complex because I essentially built my own kind of feed system using a combination of a RSS reader called Feedly, where you can essentially put any source into it and it gives you, again, just like the daily output coming from that source. All in a feed, going old school, throwing RSS.
I know Feedly. I know. I remember that back in the, I know that.
But the combination of Feedly and Instapaper to basically take highlights, and then that combined with a platform like a Roam or an Obsidian or a Notion, then you have all of your notes organized in a structured way that was extraordinarily helpful once I kind of figured out what I wanted to write. So that's a combination of technology and like
you're just name dropping some really good stuff here.
Yeah,
for us
just trying to piece some stuff together.
Yep.
I also have a Substack where some of this stuff goes deep into it. If anyone wants,
I was going to mention that because I wanted people to go and subscribe to your Substack. And I think that the biggest thing is that the prospective agents, you're either going to go with the flow or you're going to get left behind. I want people to understand that in business, we can't afford to do that, right? We can't afford to be left behind. So when people are reading this, what is like the biggest takeaway that you want them to have?
Widen your lens and realize that if anything, AI is underhyped.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is based on historians that I talk to, people that really go deep and way back and think about ancient history as well as technology history. Like this is a printing press moment.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. We get to live through it.
We get to live through it. If you want to live in a Renaissance period, we're right at the inception of it. And it allows for extraordinary creativity. And I would say a lack of definition around what that could look like. And it also brings a lot of conflict and a lot of pain for those that are resisting it. The cycle repeats over and over and over. I'm not saying anything that's not known for those that study this stuff. And again, there's a little bit on the historical moment in the book too. The other super practical thing though, when we think about AI and job loss, yes, there will be jobs lost. But based on some of the research that the Institute for the Future did separately from the work that they partnered with Weber on, they found or anticipated that 80% of the jobs in 2030 have not been invented yet.
Whoa. That's incredible.
So I saw something kind of weird today. Are you familiar with Neuralink? Yeah. So for your listeners, Neuralink is Elon Musk's computer that you implant literally in your brain. So you essentially become a cybernetic being. What that means is you control, again, a computer interface with your mind. One of the most important jobs that has yet to be defined along with that is, what do you think? Surgeons that have to actually do this kind of surgery. So what's interesting, and again, in my career path exemplifies this, I was on board to help my dad with his business and ultimately take over his business as a studio production guy. I've been in startups, I've worked in startups, I've worked in corporations, I've worked with or for 2 agencies, and I've done things I could never, ever have anticipated by just doors opening over and over and over, by helping people see things that they aren't necessarily seeing in the day-to-day work. And giving them practical advice of here's how I can engage in these tools in a way that benefits me personally, my team, and my business. And so that would be something more optimistic to think about is, yes, there will be a lot of kind of churn and conflict and pain and weirdness, but the opportunities, if you're willing to look where you need to, they're going to be unbelievable.
They're going to be everywhere.
And for your kids, they're going to have to build a whole new world.
That's pretty amazing. I think I'm a lot more quiet in this interview because you're blowing my mind with some things that I never
I'll shut up.
No, it's really good because
I'm very
I think
about this stuff.
I can feel your passion, and I think that we underestimate the time that we're in, right? I live in a place in New York that's a smaller town. It tends to be more behind the scenes. And sometimes I can just hide there and like forget that the world is growing at a very rapid pace around me because I'm in a little like urban farm town, you know? But the reality is that we're in such a bold, amazing time. And if we don't, I always think about that. Like I have to jump on the bandwagon and
or
go
at least
with
understand
this.
it. You don't have to change your lifestyle at all.
I'm not going to change the lifestyle, but as a business owner, right, to adapt to these technologies and to adapt, I mean, we do to a certain extent, for sure, but how much are we as business owners, for everybody that's watching, actually taking them as seriously as we need to move forward.
Not enough.
Not enough.
Again, I think, in the case of the news media, we are going to be inundated with the same cycle of political bull leading into November. And we know exactly what the plays are from both sides.
Yep.
There will probably be some surprising antics in between, but we pretty much know the story. And that story is going to consume media airwaves and the internet for months and months and months and months. And it will not be productive time being glued to it.
Right.
Again, if that's what we could see, what we don't see is this AI train is moving incredibly fast, and it may have a bigger impact or a greater impact than who wins the election. Who is covering this? Who is taking it seriously? Who is making sure that not just, again, the tech community or the early adopters or, again, the humanists that look at this stuff, like people just trying to operate their businesses and their day-to-day lives, think about this stuff. They're not exposed to it.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's like we're in between two worlds. We have this world that I grew up in. TV. I'm a TV guy because I was raised on TV. What are you? What are you? Are you TV? Are you social media? Or are you a combination?
I'm a combination because I'm 43, so I'm in between,
so
right?
in between.
I get both. I get both sides.
Yeah, and our kids are going to be social media AI.
I watch cable news, and they don't understand that I can't fast forward. They just don't get it. My kids are 10, 12, 14, and 18.
Yeah.
It frustrates the heck out of them. Like, can you just pause this? I'm like, I can't pause it. It's TV, And they also, I think another interesting thing just to know is that they don't call them commercials. They call them ads.
Yeah.
Little verbiage type of things. And their attention span is so short when it comes to what they view and what they watch, the shorts and the videos and things like that. That's how they consume content, right? Their agents are social media. So in PR, I'm always thinking, okay, we're doing this now. Where do we have to be in 5, 10 years to be relevant, right? Because that's going to be a challenge. PR has to evolve with all of this.
Yeah.
You have to, or you're going to get left behind. I mean, I think traditional media will always be important, but there's got to be, influencers, book talk, TikTok, all of that is just as important now and moves the needle even sometimes more than what we're seeing with traditional media these days.
Yeah. So the hard thing about writing Prospective Agents as a book is the form factor. This stuff is moving 200 miles an hour.
Yeah.
In a traditional publishing cycle is 3 years?
Yeah.
Once things are bought. That doesn't work for this genre.
Yep.
So what do? If you're in my shoes? Well, one, you have to make sure that the content is present future, and it's got to be present future for the next few years at least. So this book probably has things that might seem like super strange now and like, no way, just wait.
It'll make sense.
It's going to make a lot of sense. You're going to be like replicas. Wait till the replicas become robots.
There was actually a Netflix movie that I watched where a lady, her husband passed away, and she created an AI replica of him for years. But we didn't know that it was a replica until the very end of the movie. Yeah. So it was like, oh, he came back, he didn't die, or what happened? He pretended that he was a ghost, or he pretended that he's died and came back to life. It was like a very confusing movie. And then at the end of the movie, it was that she created an AI replica of him because she missed him so much. I was like, oh, but that's going to happen. I have no doubt that that's going to happen. But what?
So Lou Reed's wife is all over the internet right now because she created an avatar of him. Oh, and
it already has happened.
I forget the language she used, but she's addicted in kind of a horrifying way. Right. So right now, AIs are being presented to us as essentially chat interactions. And then if you check out Replica and other examples, they're not the only one. They have almost a cartoon quality to them.
Right.
But what happens when you pair AIs and what we call deep fakes, which is photorealistic images of real or unreal people? You bring those together and you have basically the proof point of what you just said. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a question of how are they going to be used and how can they be used for good versus turned into Frankenstein-like weirdness all over the place.
Yeah.
But the technology is there right now to do this stuff. This isn't science fiction. 50
this isn't
years
just a
from
Netflix
now,
movie. Yeah.
10 years from now, fiction on Netflix. It's happening right now. So I would encourage you to read the chapter on relationships, because the relationships part, it gets into this in a deep way, because we're talking about AIs. We haven't even gotten to robotics yet. When AIs and robots come together.
I'm like just shook, because I'm thinking back to what you were talking about with people that had mental health issues. And I mean, we could go down this whole other conversation of how AI can be used to treat mental health disorders and loneliness and get people back. Like, we could go down that whole thing. And there's so much opportunity out there. I see so much opportunity instead of like, is it good or bad, right? I like how you have a couple times put in perspective that I don't think we should look at it as good or bad or this or that or compare things. It's just, you have to be present to that it's happening.
Let me clarify that a bit more. So we have to be neutral on the technology, because we don't know how the technology is going to be used. So yes, you could theoretically create a replica that looks photorealistic of someone that you design. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you create that AI of a movie star or an old boyfriend or girlfriend or something like that. Immediately that's not right.
Right.
So there are certain, just like in life, if you see someone doing something that's really wrong, that it's wrong.
Right.
You can see things that are really, really good. In this case, there's going to be some gray area. But right now you have this debate of AI is going to end the world, or AI is going to be the greatest thing ever happened to the world.
Right.
And we're literally we're steps into a 26.2 mile marathon.
Right.
Steps.
So we don't know.
We don't know. And anyone who gives you a crystal ball and says, this is what the world's going to look like 20 years from now is just nuts, or trying to sell you something.
Yeah.
Because we don't know, because it's based on how we use it, or maybe how these things end up using us, which would be unprecedented. Never happened in history.
It's crazy.
Yeah. It's a fun time.
It is a fun time. It is a fun time.
Funnish.
Well, I'm so excited that you came on and shared. I feel like we could be here for hours unpacking this, but we don't have hours, but I feel like we could. But so people can find you at perspectiveagents.com and buy the book. I want everybody to buy this book because, first of all, it's a hardcover. It's great. It's published by Greenleaf. The things that I am most impressed about is everything backed by research. It's not just opinion. It's backed by research. Can you leave us with something that you're seeing that would blow our minds right now when it comes to the AI front?
Let's do two things. Again, because some of this stuff can be a turnoff. It's not tended to be. It's just intended to kind of push, your awareness of what's happening, the bounds of it a bit more. But if you really want to push things, I forget the exact stat, but it's something like 10 to 15% of teenagers today will have sex with a robot by 2040. And there will be a new classification called digisexuality.
Wow.
So even when we think about ethics, religion, and religious belief, norms, laws, think about that. Like, some people will actually have not a human as their
sex partner. They'll have a robot.
They will have a robot, and maybe that robot has a totally different relationship. We just don't know.
And there has to be laws around that, a sexual orientation around that.
Correct.
All of those things.
Think about the battles that we have today. Can you imagine the battles that we're going to have tomorrow, and how people are going to have to think expansively and rationally, and maybe in some cases irrationally, to come back to the rational? Like, this is why perspective becomes, again, the word that gets brought back over and over in the book. The book ends, though. Now let's get out of like the maybe seemingly dystopian stuff into something that is really important. It's where the book lands. Last chapter is called Agents of Well-Being. And it talks about Wall-E, and the lesson of Wall-E that be very careful that technology can be a trap. Conveniences can be a trap. Distraction can be a big trap. And you can start to become non-human, running around in hovercraft rafts and, sipping out of a sippy cup and watching kind of the big board. More importantly, though, it got into Harvard's study of what makes a good, healthy, happy life. It's been conducted for now 80 years. And there's a pattern of what makes for a good life. And what would you think the 4 things would be?
Relationships, love.
Number 1 is strong relationships. Not many relationships, but having good, strong relationships. What do you think 2 is?
I would say health, good health.
No, surprisingly no, but I'm surprised that's not. Yeah.
What else would be on there?
Well, let's cut to the chase.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't even know. You put me on the spot.
I thought you put me on the spot. Strong relationships. Work that has meaning.
Yep.
What they call psychologically rich life. Meaning, again, like curiosities. And, clearly there's entertainments in there. But entertainments, whether it's like, good food or travel or sports or whatever you're into, that doesn't endure. The other 3 do.
Okay.
Technology has nothing to do with those 3. So that's why all this stuff, at the end of the day, if it doesn't help us, it's a complete trap. You can look at some of the, discord and fallout of social media, mental health epidemics, loneliness, polarization. Like, we have to be really, really careful that we learn some lessons from the last technology push and be far more involved in what we choose to use or not use in both our personal lives and our professional lives. Because at the end of the day, we're humans and we don't want to flip into humans behaving like robots. And that could definitely be the case if you have ChatGPT write your book outline and write your book and submit, like, where's the life in that? And that's what makes reading great. That's what makes writing great. That's what makes creativity great. So that's why.
I love that.
That's why I landed on Agents for Wellbeing more than some of this weird we've been talking about.
I know. The weird, so fun though. But, I think about my last book and when I, actually printed out all 300 something pages of the book because that's how I could edit it the best. Like I couldn't sit at a screen all day, highlighted and I edited it and I made notes and then I had to go back in and type it all. And I remember that feeling of like, I wrote this, and we rob ourselves from that feeling of what you were talking about, work satisfaction and those type of things.
Totally. The process is brutal, but it's also awesome.
Yeah. We rob ourselves of that. If we just let AI do everything for us, we don't get that feeling of like, I did this.
The first time I held the draft in my hand was probably the most fun I had, the entire process, including getting the printed book.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, this thing's a beast.
It is freaking hard to write a book.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you get that first draft done, you feel like you just finished a marathon.
But you have to print it because you don't know if you're looking at it on the screen that you at least made it through that first terrible period, and then it gets crazy once you start. Did you read it to yourself?
I read it to myself.
Yeah.
Like many times over, and I had to edit it, and I'm like making check boxes and highlighting and all of that stuff because I had to. You can only look at a screen for so long. But this was 7 years ago when my last book comes out, and I'm coming out with my 4th book in 2025. I'm working on it now, and I'm like, why am I doing this to myself again?
Yeah.
I'm like, after every book, I call it book PTSD. After every book, I say, I'm never doing this again.
Yeah, but you got to do it.
But what is your goal for this? Like when you wrote it, like what's the goal for prospective agents, for 2024, 2025, beyond? What do you hope that this book and your vision and your mission of helping people does for the world? So
again, I came back to the family story. The reality is, again, a book is a business. It's not a great business, but it can make a difference for people.
Yeah.
And what I bring into my work life every day, helping clients and colleagues stay on the right side of a curve, is super important, but it's limited. And I think more people need to have some of that intel for their own lives.
Yeah.
And so it's really a bit of a passion project, to be honest. And beyond the book, there's a newsletter on Substack. It's part serialized stuff, but it's part updates because there's new stuff that's like hitting every week. And I'm like, oh my God, that slides into chapter whatever. And, you know, I also created a GPT, used the research notes, dumped the whole copy into OpenAI for better, for worse. And I use that as a bit of a research partner, but also like anyone who buys the book or doesn't buy the book can go and start to interact with a chat bot and ask all the questions that this thing suggests.
That's so cool.
And again, there's no money with that. It's just trying to help people see things that are going to be really important.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, I love how you turned, you know, the story of your dad into something that is so meaningful and helpful to other people. I think that's a really powerful message to people, that you can turn around whatever you go through.
Oh, yeah.
And a powerful message to all of us entrepreneurs that we have to get on the other side of this, because if not, we will not stay where we need to be. So thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, this was great.
Yeah, I loved it.
Could talk all day.
So I know. So if you guys want to go check out Perspective Agents, go to his website. It's on Amazon. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, good time.